Okay, let's jump into this deep dive. We're really wading into some fascinating stuff today, where cutting-edge AI meets, well, all this data collection and our own individual privacy.
It's definitely a thorny area, that intersection.
Absolutely. And we've got some material that really brings it to life. We'll look at a specific recent controversy, kind of a flashpoint, but also explore the wider picture, the tech itself, the laws, the ethics.
Yeah, trying to make sense of it all.
Our mission here is to pull out the key insights, help you understand what really matters in this fast-moving landscape. Before we really dive in, just want to mention this deep dive is sponsored by Stonefly.
Uh-huh.
If you're looking for secure storage, maybe ransomware-proof solutions, Stonefly is a leader in enterprise storage, backup, DR, AI storage, cloud solutions, you name it.
They do the air-gapped and immutable storage, right,
Oh.
for data protection.
Exactly, designed to protect critical data. You can schedule a demo by contacting sales@stonefly.com. Okay, so that flashpoint I mentioned. Microsoft's AI tool, Recall. Let's start there.
Right, recall for Windows 11. The basic idea was it takes screenshots of almost everything you do on your PC.
Yeah.
Every few seconds.
Everything. Wow.
Pretty much. Then it indexes it all, stores it so you can search back through your history using natural language. Find that web page you saw or that document you worked on?
Okay, I can see the potential utility, but I also immediately think privacy. What was the reaction when it was announced?
Oh, it was swift. Security experts, privacy folks.
Yeah.
They immediately raised red flags. Terms like privacy nightmare, significant security risk were thrown around pretty quickly.
Why such a strong reaction?
Well, think about it. A continuous visual record of everything on your screen. That's potentially your emails, messages, financial info, passwords if they pop up, all stored in one place. A gold mine if someone could access it.
Yeah, okay, so Microsoft must have heard that feedback. Did they change anything?
They did. They made some adjustments before a wider rollout. They made it opt-in, not on by default. That was a big one. They added requirements like needing Windows, hello here, facial recognition or fingerprint to access it. They tried to filter out sensitive info like passwords or credit card numbers automatically.
Pride. Sounds uncertain.
Well, yeah, filtering like that isn't foolproof. They also let users exclude specific apps or websites, block it during private browsing sessions. They added some technical protections against attacks and options to manage the storage or delete snapshots.
So quite a few changes then, but
It
not enough for everyone. I remember Signal getting involved.
Exactly. Signal, the encrypted messaging app folks, they looked at the changes and basically said, nope, still not good enough. Their view was that the core idea of Recall constantly screenshotting still put sensitive content displayed within privacy-focused apps like theirs at risk.
Even with the safeguards.
Even with the safeguards, they felt the fundamental mechanism was the problem.
So what did Signal do? Did they just warn users?
They went further. They actually updated their Windows desktop app to actively block Windows from taking screenshots of the Signal window by default.
So Recall just wouldn't capture anything inside Signal.
Correct. If you had Recall enabled, the Signal part of your screen history would just be blank, essentially.
How did they manage that technically? Blocking the operating system itself?
Yeah, it's interesting. They use something called a Digital Rights Management Flag, a DRM flag, on their app window.
DRM. Isn't that usually for stopping movie piracy?
Typically, yes.
Yeah.
It tells the OS, don't copy or screenshot this protected content. Signal repurposed that flag to basically say, this is private communication, don't screenshot it for recall.
That feels clever, but also maybe a bit hacky. Like using a tool for something it wasn't really designed for. What did Signal's developers say?
That's pretty much how they framed it. One of their developers, Joshua Lund, said they felt Microsoft gave them no other option. He made the point that apps shouldn't have to rely on, I think he called it a one weird trick, to protect user privacy from the OS itself. And he argued there should be proper developer tools for this. And maybe AI teams need to think through these implications a bit more carefully before launching features like this.
Yeah, that really sums up the tension, doesn't it? This drive for powerful new AI features bumping right up against established privacy needs and security concerns.
Absolutely. It's a perfect microcosm. Innovation pushing boundaries and privacy advocates pushing back, sometimes with technical workarounds. It also highlights potential usability trade-offs that screen security flag Signal used might interfere with things like screen readers for accessibility, though they did make it possible to turn off in settings with a warning.
Okay, so that Recall versus Signal situation is a really concrete example. Let's use it to zoom out a bit. This isn't just about one feature, is it? It's about this whole broader landscape of AI, massive data collection, and privacy.
Exactly. AI advancements are giving us incredible tools for analysis for finding patterns in data we couldn't see before. But that power, as the recall example shows, creates really complex ethical questions, legal hurdles, especially around privacy, consent, and how this data might be misused.
Let's dig into some of the specific AI tech developments from the last year or two and their privacy side. Maybe start with machine learning, ML.
Sure. ML is sort of the engine behind a lot of this.
Hmm.
And one interesting trend, partly driven by privacy concerns, is federated learning.
Right, I've heard of that. The idea is the data stays put, right?
Precisely. Instead of collecting all the sensitive data, say, medical scans from different hospitals into one giant central database, you train the ML model directly on the distributed data. The data stays local, on the device, or within the organization.
So only the learnings, the model updates get shared.
Exactly. We've seen this used in medical imaging projects recently. Multiple hospitals collaborating to build a better diagnostic model without any patient scans actually leaving their own secure systems. It fits nicely with principles like data minimization, less risk of one huge breach.
Makes sense. But are there catches? Downsides?
Oh, sure. It's not a silver bullet. Governance becomes trickier. How do you audit or ensure compliance when the data is spread out? And there are still security challenges. Researchers are exploring things like model inversion attacks, where someone might try to figure out some of the original training data just by looking at the model updates that were shared.
Okay. Any other ML privacy techniques worth mentioning?
Differential privacy is another big one. The core idea here is adding carefully calculated statistical noise to the data or to the results of queries run on the data.
Noise, like random static.
Sort of, but mathematically precise noise. Enough so you can't tell if any one specific person's data was included in the analysis, but not so much that you can't still get accurate insights about the group as a whole.
That sounds like a fine line to walk.
It absolutely is. There's a fundamental trade-off. More noise means better individual privacy, but potentially less accurate or useful aggregate results. Finding that sweet spot is key.
Okay, let's shift gears to natural language processing, NLP. This is the world of large language models, LLMs, like GPT-4.
Right, and LLMs are incredibly powerful at understanding and generating human language, analyzing text, speech, even images now, from just immense amounts of data.
And this is where it gets a bit spooky, right? The idea that they can figure out things about you that you didn't explicitly say.
This is a really crucial point, and yeah, maybe a little unsettling. Research, even very recently, shows these models can infer surprisingly sensitive personal details, your political leanings, maybe hints about your mental health, religious beliefs, just from analyzing text you wrote that seems completely innocuous on the surface.
How does that work? How can it tell from casual text?
It's what's sometimes called the mosaic theory of privacy. Individually, maybe the things you post online, the comments you make, the articles you read, they seem harmless. But an LLM can analyze patterns across vast amounts of your text, combine these little non-sensitive pieces, and build a surprisingly detailed and potentially sensitive profile.
Wow, so it pieces together a picture you never intended to reveal.
Exactly. And that blows up traditional ideas about consent, doesn't it? How can you give meaningful consent if you don't even realize what can be inferred from the data you are agreeing to share? What does personal data even mean if innocuous data becomes sensitive when analyzed by AI?
That's a really big question. Okay, what about computer vision? We see cameras everywhere now.
Yeah, computer vision has advanced incredibly. It's fueling much more biometric data collection. Facial recognition is the obvious one in public spaces, airports, shops, even workplaces, but also things like analyzing posture or gait, or even emotion recognition technology.
And emotion recognition, that sounds fraught with potential issues.
Highly controversial. Potential uses in mental health screening are discussed, but the accuracy, bias, and sheer privacy implications are huge. And the Clearview AI case is kind of the poster child for the risks here, wouldn't you say?
Remind me about that one.
Clearview scraped billions, literally billions of photos from public websites, social media, you name it, to build a massive facial recognition database. They then sold access primarily to law enforcement.
Without asking the people in the photos.
Absolutely no consent from the individuals. It sparked outrage, lawsuits, regulatory actions all over the world. It hit all the hot buttons. Lack of consent, using data collected for one purpose, sharing photos online for a totally different one, facial recognition database, people's rights to access or delete their data, and the whole mess of regulating data that crosses borders.
A real mess. Okay, and then there's the Internet of Things, IoT, and this idea of edge AI, all those smart devices.
Right. Your smart speaker, thermostat, fridge, cameras. The sheer number of connected devices means data collection is just happening constantly, almost invisibly, in our homes, cars, cities.
And Edge AI is supposed to help with the privacy aspect by processing data locally.
That's the idea. Instead of sending all the raw sensor data, say audio from your smart speaker, to a central cloud server for processing, Edge AI allows more processing to happen right there on the device itself.
So less sensitive data flying around.
Potentially, yes. It can reduce the amount of raw data leaving your control, which could be good for privacy, and reduce the risk associated with a big central data breach. But,
There's always a but.
always, Edge AI creates its own challenges. Now, every single device needs to be really secure because it's processing potentially sensitive data locally. It can create data silos, the data stays on the device, making it harder to get a bigger picture or do certain kinds of analysis, and it doesn't solve the consent problem. Just because the processing is local doesn't mean you fully understand or agree to what data is being collected by all these ubiquitous devices in the first place.
Yeah, good point. Before we move off tech, just briefly, what about quantum machine learning? That sounds very future tech.
It is still largely theoretical, or in early research stages, QML. But the potential is that quantum computers could perform certain machine learning tasks much, much faster than classical computers.
And the privacy angle.
The big worry right now isn't QML itself, but the underlying quantum computing power. If large-scale fault-tolerant quantum computers become a reality, they could break most of the encryption we rely on today to protect sensitive data, online banking, secure communications, everything.
Break current encryption, that's huge.
It's a massive potential threat. That's why there's a global effort, led by organizations like NIST in the US, to develop and standardize new encryption methods, post-quantum cryptography, that are resistant to attacks from both classical and quantum computers. There are also concerns that QML algorithms might be even less transparent than current AI, making bias and explainability even harder issues.
Okay, so the technology is racing ahead, constantly creating these new privacy challenges. It feels like we need some grounding principles. Let's talk about the fundamentals of data privacy itself. What does it really mean?
Right. It's more than just locking data down, more than just security. Data privacy is fundamentally about how organizations collect, use, and share personal data ethically and legally. It's about transparency, telling people what you're collecting, why, how you'll use it, who you'll share it with.
And why is this so critical for organizations to get right, beyond just doing the right thing?
Oh, the stakes are very high.
Right.
Getting it wrong can lead to serious consequences. You've got regulatory actions, audits, investigations, even orders to stop processing data entirely. There's huge reputational damage. Losing customer trust is incredibly hard to win back.
Financial penalties, too, right? I remember massive GDPR fines.
Absolutely. Fines can be enormous, potentially crippling for some businesses. In some cases, there can even be criminal liability. And then there's the operational cost of just dealing with it all, responding to people exercising their rights, managing breaches, implementing changes. It's significant.
And things like GDPR and those big data breaches have really pushed this up the agenda globally.
Definitely. Public awareness is much higher, and GDPR really set a kind of gold standard that's influenced laws popping up all over the world.
Okay, let's define some key terms clearly. What counts as personal data? It's not just my name and address, is it?
No, it's much broader. It's any information that relates to an identifiable living person. That includes obvious things like name, ID number, location data, email address, but also online identifiers like IP addresses or cookie IDs, biometric data like fingerprints or facial images, even things that indirectly identify someone when combined, like maybe your job title, your postcode, and your date of birth together could identify you, even if none of them alone would.
And then there's sensitive personal data. What makes it different?
Sensitive personal data is a specific subset that gets extra protection under most laws because its misuse could lead to discrimination or significant harm. This typically includes things like your racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious beliefs, trade union membership, genetic data, biometric data when used for identification, health data, and information about your sex life or sexual orientation. You need stronger safeguards and often a more specific legal basis to process this kind of data.
Got it. We also hear about controllers and processors. What's the difference there? It seems important for responsibility.
It's crucial. The controller is the organization that decides why personal data should be processed and how it will be processed. They make the key decisions. Think of them as being in the driver's seat.
Okay.
The processor is an organization that processes personal data on behalf of the controller, following their instructions. Think of a cloud storage provider or a payroll company processing employee data for another business. They act on instructions.
Can one company be both?
Yes, absolutely. An organization might be a controller for its employee data, but a processor for data it handles on behalf of its clients. The key is that the controller has the main responsibility for compliance, but processors also have direct legal obligations under laws like GDPR.
Okay, that clarifies the roles. So, based on these definitions, what are the core principles that should guide how organizations handle personal data?
Most modern privacy laws are built around a set of core principles. Key ones include lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. You need a legal basis, you can't deceive people, and you must be open about what you're doing.
Right.
Purpose limitation only. Collect data for specific, explicit, legitimate purposes that you've told people about, and don't use it for incompatible purposes later. Data minimization only. Collect and process data that's actually necessary for that purpose. Don't grab everything just in case.
Keep it lean.
Exactly. Storage limitation. Don't keep personal data forever. Keep it only as long as necessary for the purpose you collected it for. Integrity and confidentiality, which is essentially security. You must protect the data from breaches, unauthorized access, loss, etc. And finally, accountability. The organization must be able to demonstrate its compliance with all these principles. Prove it.
And these principles translate into rights for individuals.
Yes, that's the other side of the coin. These laws give individuals rights over their data. Common ones include the right to access the data an organization holds about you, the right to get inaccuracies corrected, the right to have your data erased in certain circumstances, sometimes called the right to be forgotten.
What else?
Also, often rights to restrict or limit how your data is processed, the right to object to certain types of processing, like direct marketing, and rights related to automated decision-making, knowing when significant decisions are being made about you solely by AI and potentially challenging them or requesting human review.
Are these rights absolute? Can I always demand my data be erased?
Not always. They often have exceptions. For example, the right to erasure doesn't apply if the organization needs to keep the data to comply with a legal obligation or for certain other specific reasons. It depends on the context and the legal basis for processing.
Legal basis. You mentioned that under the lawfulness principle, organizations need a valid reason before they process data.
Yes, absolutely critical. You must identify and document your lawful basis before you start processing. And generally, you can't just change your mind later if your first choice wasn't appropriate.
What are the common options for a lawful basis?
The most well-known is probably consent. The individual freely gives specific informed agreement. But it's not the only one, and often not the best one. Others include contractual necessity. You need the data to fulfill a contract with the person, like processing their address to deliver goods. Legal obligation. You're required by law to process the data, like for tax purposes. Protecting someone's vital interests, like in a medical emergency. Performing a task in the public interest, or relying on legitimate interests.
Legitimate interest sounds a bit vague.
It can be, and it requires careful balancing. The organization's legitimate interest in processing the data must be balanced against the individual's rights and freedoms. It needs a specific assessment. It's not a free pass.
Okay, so we have these principles, rights, legal bases, a solid framework on paper. But as we keep saying, AI is moving so fast. How are the legal systems and governance approaches actually trying to keep up?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the short answer is they're struggling. Existing laws, even relatively modern ones like GDPR, weren't really designed with the full spectrum of AI capabilities in mind, especially things like generative AI or complex inferential analytics.
Let's compare how different parts of the world are tackling this. The EU seems to be leading with the AI Act.
Yes, the EU has gone for a comprehensive horizontal regulation with the AI Act. It sits alongside GDPR. The core idea is a risk-based approach.
Risk-based, how does that work?
They categorize AI systems based on risk. Unacceptable risk practices, like social scoring by governments or real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces, with very narrow exceptions, are banned outright. High-risk systems, things used in critical infrastructure, employment, education, law enforcement, medical devices, face strict rules.
What kind of rules for high risk?
Things like mandatory conformity assessments before they hit the market, requirements for data quality, logging capabilities, transparency so users know they're interacting with AI, human oversight measures, and ensuring robustness and accuracy. Then there are lower risk categories with fewer obligations, mostly around transparency.
How does this mesh with GDPR? Is it complicated?
It complements GDPR, which still applies to any personal data processed by the AI system. But yes, there are tricky areas. For example, the AI Act demands transparency about how high-risk systems work, but the GDPR also grants individuals a right to explanation for automated decisions. Reconciling those with highly complex black box AI models is a real challenge. How do you truly explain a decision made by a neural network with billions of parameters?
Right. So a strong unified standard in the EU, but maybe challenges with applying it to the cutting edge.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, contrast that with the U.S. approach,
Which is more?
sectoral and fragmented. There's no single overarching federal AI law or comprehensive federal privacy law like GDPR. Instead, you have different agencies regulating AI within their existing domains. The FDA for medical AI, the Department of Transportation for autonomous vehicles, the FTC looking at fairness and consumer protection issues across the board.
And state laws fill some gaps.
Exactly. You have a patchwork. California leads with the CCPAC PRA, offering strong consumer privacy rights. Illinois has a specific law about AI in video job interviews. Other states are introducing their own laws. So the rules can vary significantly depending on the sector and the state.
What are the pros and cons of that approach?
The pro is flexibility rules can potentially be tailored better to specific industry contexts. The con is complexity and potential gaps. It's hard for businesses operating nationally to navigate, and some areas might fall between the cracks of different agencies or state laws. The FTC has been quite active using its existing powers against unfair or deceptive practices involving AI, though.
Okay, and then China. A very different model again.
Very different. China has taken a comprehensive, centralized, state-driven approach. They're simultaneously pushing hard to develop AI capabilities and implementing quite strict regulations, particularly around algorithms and generative AI.
What's the focus of the regulations?
Key elements include algorithmic registry and assessment requirements, rules on data security, content moderation, preventing discriminatory outputs, and promoting AI ethics, but very much defined through the lens of state control and socialist values. It's about harnessing AI while managing its risks according to government priorities.
So 3 distinct models. EU, comprehensive risk-based. US, sectoral fragmented. China, centralized state-controlled. What are the big picture trade-offs?
Well, the EU aims for high protection and a level playing field across its market, but might risk being perceived as less flexible or slower to adapt. The US offers flexibility but struggles with consistency, complexity, and potential regulatory gaps. China's model can be efficient for implementing controls quickly, but raises significant concerns internationally about state surveillance, censorship, and individual freedoms compared to the others.
Is there a sense of which approach might work best for something as dynamic as AI?
It's early days, but many discussions lean towards some kind of hybrid, maybe overarching principles like the EU's, ensuring a baseline level of protection and ethics, combined with more specific rules for particular high-risk sectors, maybe like the U.S. approach, and critically building in mechanisms for regular review and updates because the tech won't stand still.
Makes sense. Beyond formal laws, what about ethics frameworks and internal company governance?
They're incredibly important, especially because the law often lags. Things like the OECD AI principles, focusing on human-centered values, fairness, transparency, safety, accountability, have been really influential globally, even though they aren't legally binding. They provide a common language.
And companies setting up ethics boards, does that work?
It can, but it's challenging. There's always the risk of ethics washing, having a board that looks good that doesn't have real teeth or influence, especially when ethical considerations conflict with business goals. For governance to be effective, ethical thinking needs to be embedded throughout the entire AI development lifecycle, not just reviewed by a committee at the end.
Let's loop back to the technical side. You mentioned privacy-enhancing technologies, PETs like federated learning earlier. How crucial are these going forward?
I'd say they're essential. PETs are some of the most practical tools we have to actually implement privacy principles in complex AI systems. They offer ways to get the benefits of data analysis while minimizing the exposure of raw personal data. Techniques like differential privacy, federated learning, homomorphic encryption, which allows computation on encrypted data, these are vital.
Are big tech companies using these?
Yes, increasingly. Apple uses differential privacy on devices. Google uses federated learning for things like keyboard predictions. And alongside PTs, robust security practices like using air-gapped and immutable storage for sensitive AI training datasets become even more critical. If you do have sensitive data, protecting it from ransomware or theft is paramount.
But implementing PTs isn't just plug and play.
Definitely not. There are technical complexities, potential impacts on accuracy or performance that need to be managed. And explaining how P-keys work to the public, Building trust that they're actually protecting privacy is another challenge that can seem like another black box.
Which brings us to public understanding. How important is AI literacy?
Hugely important. People need a basic understanding of how AI works, how their data is being used, what the risks and benefits are, what rights they have. But educating the public effectively when the technology itself is evolving so rapidly, that's a massive challenge.
And given AI doesn't respect borders, international cooperation must be key too.
Absolutely essential. Data flows globally. AI models trained in one country are deployed in others. We need international dialogue and coordination on standards and regulations. Initiatives like the Global Partnership on AI, GPI, are trying to facilitate this, but aligning different national interests and legal traditions is hard work.
Can we ground this with a few quick real-world examples? How do these tensions play out in, say, healthcare?
Sure. Think about AI used for clinical decision support software that helps doctors diagnose diseases or recommend treatments by analyzing patient data, like some systems from companies like Epic. Huge potential benefits for accuracy and efficiency.
The but again?
But risks of bias in the training data leading to worse outcomes for certain demographic groups. Lack of transparency. Can the doctor or patient understand why the AI recommended a particular course of action? And questions of liability. Who is responsible if the AI makes a mistake?
Okay, how about finance?
AI is used extensively. JP Morgan Chase's Coin platform, for example, uses NLP to review complex loan agreements and contracts much faster than humans could. Big efficiency gains. But risks include potential errors in interpreting nuanced legal language, the need for rigorous human oversight, concerns about job displacement for paralegals and lawyers, and obviously extreme sensitivity around data security for financial information.
And smart cities. You mentioned pervasive data collection.
Right. Take a project like the City Brain in New Songdo, South Korea. It aims to optimize city operations, traffic, energy, waste management, using data from sensors and cameras everywhere. Benefits in efficiency, sustainability. But major privacy concerns about constant surveillance in public spaces. Who controls that data? How are decisions made based on it? And the risk of function creep data collected for traffic management later being used for law enforcement surveillance, perhaps without public knowledge or consent.
These examples really drive home that this isn't abstract. This AI privacy tension is happening now across all sectors.
It really is. It's a constant negotiation, trying to harness the power while upholding fundamental rights in a landscape that just keeps shifting.
So, we started with recall how a seemingly simple feature sparked a privacy battle, pushing Signal to find technical defenses. And we've seen how AI can now infer so much from data, often without our explicit awareness or consent. It leaves us with a huge question, doesn't it? As this technology keeps accelerating, how do we genuinely embed respect for fundamental rights into innovation itself? What mechanisms, legal, technical, ethical, are actually going to be effective when the tech is always one step ahead? Thinking about everything we've discussed, what's the single biggest question or challenge that stands out to you that we really need to grapple with next?
That's a tough one. There are so many interconnected challenges.
Before you answer, just a final word from our sponsor, Stonefly.
Right.
For secure, ransomware-proof enterprise storage, backup, disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions, check out Stonefly. Remember, they offer air-gapped and immutable storage for robust data protection. You can reach out to sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo. Okay, that brings us to the end of this deep dive on AI, data collection, privacy, and governance.
It's certainly a complex field, and one that's not going to get any simpler soon.
Absolutely. Definitely an area to keep a close eye on. Thanks for joining us.